They're coming. The police are here. I didn't do it. I swear I didn't do it.
The cadaver dogs stopped so suddenly that even the handlers froze. The farm was huge, almost 200 acres of fields, broken fences, and old wooden buildings. But the dogs kept dragging their leashes back to the same spot behind the rusted equipment shed.
He went this way. Fan out and secure the backyard.
They refused to leave. They pawed at the dirt. They whined.
I've got something here.
One even lay flat on the ground, nose pressed against a concrete slab, as if something underneath was calling it. Detective Sarah Collins watched the scene with her jaw tight. She had been searching for the truth for 3 long years, and she knew that cadaver dogs didn't behave like this unless something was terribly wrong. The slab was old, cracked around the edges, and covered with weed. It looked like something someone poured in a hurry, not part of the original structure. The lead dog handler, Mike Greer, knelt down and whispered, "They're telling us something's under here." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we break it open." But right before the officers lifted their tools, one of the dogs began barking. Deep, sharp barks, like it sensed something none of them could see. And that was the moment everyone realized this wasn't just a search anymore. It was the beginning of a discovery that would change everything. What was under that slab? Who put it there? And why were the dogs so desperate to reveal it? To answer that, we have to go back, way back, before the concrete was even wet. The story began 3 years earlier, in the spring of 2021, when Michelle Turner's younger brother, Evan Turner, suddenly disappeared. Evan wasn't the kind of man who vanished for no reason. He was 26, he loved fishing on the weekend, and he always called their mom every Sunday without fail. He worked part-time at a hardware store and spent his evenings fixing old cars with his friends. Nothing about his life suggested danger. But on April 17th, he didn't come home. At first, nobody panicked. Evan had stayed out late plenty of times before. Maybe he was with friends. Maybe his phone died. But when hours turned into a full day and still no one heard from him, his family started feeling that cold, heavy fear that comes when something is terribly wrong. Michelle filed a missing persons report. The police searched Evan's apartment, his car, his workplace, and the usual hangout spots. Nothing. No calls from his phone. No purchases on his credit card. No signs of struggle. It was like the earth simply opened and swallowed him. Weeks went by, then months, then a whole year. Michelle didn't stop searching. She handed out flyers. She joined online missing person group. She called hospitals, shelters, even jails. She begged the police to reopen leads that had dried up. And every time she looked at the front door of their mother's home, she imagined Evan walking through it. But he never did. In 2022, a tiny piece of information finally surfaced. A neighbor had seen Evan talking to a man named Richard Morrison on the last night he was seen alive. Richard owned a huge farm about 40 minutes from town. He was quiet, kept to himself, and didn't have many friends. People whispered that he didn't like visitors and didn't like questions even more. Detectives went to speak with him. Richard said he barely knew Evan. Said Evan had stopped by the farm once or twice to look at some old car parts. Said he hadn't seen him in years. There was no evidence to contradict him. The case went cold again. But in early 2024, everything changed. A hiker found a torn piece of Evan's jacket deep in the woods, about 2 miles from Richard's property line. At first, investigators weren't even sure it was his. But when DNA tests came back positive, the sheriff's office realized something important. Evan had been near Richard's farm the night he disappeared. Suddenly, the old farm became the center of the investigation. And with that, Detective Sarah Collins, one of the most persistent investigators in the county, took over the case. Sarah was known for her focus. She didn't give up on people, especially not missing victims. When she looked at the aerial map of the Morrison property, she noticed something odd. A new concrete slab had appeared behind the equipment shed sometime after spring 2021. It wasn't on older photos. and that was enough to start a search warrant. On September 14, 2024, the investigation began at sunrise. Officers spread out across the land, checking barns, fields, and piles of rusted scrap metal. Drone footage scanned the wide farm, showing long shadows stretching across the grass. Everything looked ordinary, until the dogs arrived. Cadaver dogs are trained to detect the scent of human remains even after years have passed. And within 15 minutes of stepping onto the property, all 3 dogs began heading toward the same direction, as if pulled by an invisible line. They circled the equipment shed. They sniffed the air. Their tails stiffened. Then they moved behind the building, toward the weed, toward that lonely concrete slab. But before we return to that moment, we need to understand why Evan ever crossed paths with a man like Richard Morrison. Back in 2021, Evan had been trying to fix up an old Ford Mustang. He didn't have much money, so he searched online for cheap car parts. That's how he found a listing from Richard, someone selling parts for almost nothing. It seemed too good to be true, but Evan didn't care. He loved fixing cars more than anything. Michelle had warned him not to meet strangers at isolated places, but Evan laughed it off. "It's just a farm, sis," he had said. "Besides, the guy probably just wants the junk gone." But when Evan got to the farm, something felt off. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. No animals, no workers, just old buildings and long stretches of land. Richard greeted him with a stiff smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Still, Evan didn't want to judge. He followed Richard to the back of the property where the car parts were stored in a barn. What happened after that was something only 2 people knew, one of whom never got to speak again, and the other who had spent years pretending nothing happened. Michelle later remembered a strange phone call Evan made that night. He sounded nervous. He said he would be home soon. He said he needed to talk to her about something weird that happened at the farm. But before she could ask questions, the line cut off. That was the last time anyone heard his voice. Detective Sarah knew this call was a key piece of the puzzle. Something weird happened at that farm. Something that made Evan scared. Something he wasn't supposed to see. And now, standing beside the concrete slab 3 years later, Sarah felt that same fear creeping into her own thoughts. The dogs were restless. Their paws scratched at the edges of the slab. They whined and circled again and again, refusing to leave the area. Their behavior was so intense that even the most experienced handlers exchanged worried glances. Sarah stepped closer, kneeling beside the dogs. The cold surface of the concrete felt wrong. It was thin in some places, thick in others, as if someone had poured it quickly, without planning. She looked at Mike, the handler. "How sure are you?" Mike wiped sweat from his forehead. "One dog alerting is important," he pointed to the other 2. "But 3 dogs? All on the same spot? That's not chance." Sarah's heart pounded. This is it. But right before she gave the order to crack the slab open, something unexpected happened. From inside the shed, a loud thud echoed, deep, heavy, like something falling over. Every officer jumped. Mike tightened the dogs' leashes. The dogs began barking again, louder and more frantic than before, pulling toward the shed as if danger was inside. Sarah raised her hand and whispered, "Everyone stay back." The wind moved slowly across the grass. The farm felt suddenly alive, as if the land itself was warning them. Something or someone was inside that shed. And whatever it was, it did not want them lifting that slab. That was when Sarah realized this search might not just reveal what happened to Evan. It might expose something far bigger and far more dangerous than any of them expected. She signaled 2 officers to move toward the shed door. As they reached for the handle, the door suddenly swung open on its own. And what they saw standing inside made every single person on that farm take a step back. The shed door swung open so fast that every officer on the scene froze. The sunlight pushed into the dark interior, lighting up rows of hanging tools, broken engines, and dusty shelves. But the thing that made every person step back wasn't a person at all. It was a shadow, tall, still, shaped like someone standing behind the shelves. The dogs barked wildly again, pulling their handlers toward the shed, but Sarah raised her hand sharply. "Hold them back. We don't know what's in there." The officers tightened their grip, and the barking turned to nervous whining. The shadow didn't move. It remained in the corner, half hidden, almost blending with the items stacked around it. For a moment, nobody dared to breathe. Officer Daniels, the youngest on the team, whispered, "Is someone in there?" "It's possible," Sarah muttered back. "Be ready." She stepped forward carefully, her flashlight raised. With each step, her boots echoed faintly on the wooden floor of the shed. Dust floated through the air like tiny bits of ash. The smell was musty, old wood, oil, and something else, something metallic. When Sarah reached the doorway, she aimed the flashlight directly at the shadow, and the truth became clear. It wasn't a person at all. It was a large, human-shaped scarecrow, propped against a metal beam, its clothes ripped and stuffed with straw. A plastic mask covered its face, one eye missing, the other painted red. Some kind of twisted joke, or a warning. Daniels let out a shaky laugh. Just a scarecrow. But Sarah didn't laugh. Something about it felt wrong. Scarecrows usually stood in fields, not hidden in sheds. And the way this one leaned forward, as if watching them, made her skin crawl. "This wasn't meant to scare birds," she said. "This was meant to scare people." They searched the shed with caution. Tools, ropes, rusted lawnmowers, a few plastic bins. Nothing alive. Nothing moving. No sign anyone had been inside recently. But when Sarah walked to the back of the shed, she stopped. There were footprints, fresh ones, boot prints leading from the door to the shelves, and then stopping. No other prints going out the back. No side door. No escape route. Daniel swallowed. So someone was in here. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "But the shed was empty when we opened it. Meaning whoever stood in here," she pointed to the prints, "was gone before we stepped inside." "Gone where?" Daniels whispered. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have one. She walked back toward the concrete slab, her mind racing. Something about the shed didn't add up. Someone had been watching them. Someone close enough to know exactly where the officers were searching. And someone who had a reason to fear what they might find under that slab. The cadaver dogs were restless again, circling and pawing at the concrete. Their bodies were stiff, alert, pulled by a scent only they could understand. The handlers looked uneasy now. 3 dogs reacting like this was rare. Before giving any order, Sarah stepped aside and took a deep breath. "Everybody listen up. Whatever is under this slab is important. We need to handle this carefully. No mistakes." The officers lined up, waiting for her command. But before she could speak, Michelle Turner, Evan's sister, arrived at the edge of the property with her mother. A deputy had escorted them once the search began, but they insisted on coming as soon as they heard the dogs had alerted. Michelle looked exhausted. Months of searching had drained her eyes, but they still held a stubborn glimmer of hope. As she approached, she asked, "Is it him? Did they find something?" Sarah gently stepped toward her. "We don't know yet. The dogs believe something is beneath the slab, but we haven't removed it." Michelle nodded, but her hands trembled. Her mother, Susan, held her arm tightly, as if afraid Michelle might fall. "Please," Susan whispered, her voice shaking. "Please tell us you're close." "We're doing everything we can," Sarah replied. "But I need you both to stay back for now. This could get dangerous." Michelle looked at the slab, her eyes filling. "I just want my brother home. Even if it's not how we wanted." Her voice cracked, and Susan pulled her closer, whispering prayers under her breath. Sarah turned back to the team. "All right," she said firmly. "Let's begin." 2 officers brought sledgehammers. Others held shovels and pry bars. The dogs were secured to posts so they wouldn't get hurt when the breaking started. The first blow landed. The crack echoed through the fields like the sound of a gunshot. The second blow followed. Pieces of concrete chipped off, revealing dirt underneath. The dogs barked and whined, desperate to get closer. Every officer felt the tension rising like smoke. Then, as another piece broke away, a thick, strange smell escaped from the soil, something that made everyone pause. Officer Harris coughed. "What is that?" Mike, the dog handler, frowned deeply. That's decomposition." Michelle covered her mouth, tears falling. Susan leaned against her, both shaking. Sarah raised her hand. "Keep going." The officers swung harder now, each strike sending bits of slab flying. The more they broke, the stronger the smell became. Sarah could feel her pulse in her throat. Something was definitely under there. But right as they reached the point where the dirt was clearly visible, Officer Daniels stopped suddenly. "Detective," he said, "you need to see this." Sarah stepped toward him, expecting remains. But what she saw wasn't bone. It wasn't clothing. It wasn't a body. It was metal. A rusted metal box, about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, buried just deep enough to be hidden, but not deep enough to remove without lifting the slab. Daniels whispered, "What is that?" The dogs barked louder now, loud enough to shake everyone's nerve. Sarah crouched slightly. The box was dented, old, sealed with bolt. Someone had taken time to make sure it wouldn't open easily. Officer Harris swallowed. "Detective, do you think?" "No guesses," Sarah said. "We open it." Michelle cried out, "Please, please tell me he's not in that box." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't know. She didn't want to give false hope or false heartbreak. The officers cleared more dirt, their hands shaking slightly. The smell grew thicker, heavier, like something trapped for years was finally escaping. Sarah reached for her radio. "I need evidence text to the slab. ASAP." But before she could finish her sentence, a sharp crack cut through the air. Not concrete, not tools. A gunshot. Everyone ducked. Michelle screamed. Officers pulled her and her mother behind the patrol cars. Sarah spun toward the direction of the shot, the tree leaned near the northern edge of the property. The branches were shaking. "Someone's out there," Daniels shouted. A second gunshot exploded. This time, the bullet hit the side of the equipment shed. Officers grabbed rifles. Others shouted for cover. The dogs barked so loudly it was almost deafening. Sarah yelled, "Do not fire unless you have a visual." The team scrambled behind vehicles and hay bales. Dust rose in clouds as more bullets hit the dirt. Michelle sobbed, "Oh my God, who's shooting at us?" But Sarah knew exactly who. There was only one person who had any reason to panic now. Richard Morrison. The man who owned the farm. The man Evan was last seen with. The man who suddenly vanished when the search warrant was issued, and never came home. He was here, watching, and he was willing to shoot to keep them away from the slab. Sarah shouted into her radio, "Officer down? Anybody hit?" One officer called back, "We're okay. No injuries." Another answered, "He's moving through the trees. I saw something, northwest side." Sarah's heart pounded. "Do not engage unless you have a clear target. Contain the perimeter." But then, a chilling scream ripped through the air. It wasn't Michelle. It wasn't the officers. It was a man's scream. Then another gunshot. Then silence. Cold, heavy silence. The kind that tells you something very, very bad just happened in those trees. "Detective," Daniels whispered, eyes wide. "What if he's not shooting at us?" Sarah's stomach twisted. "What if," he continued, voice trembling, "someone else is out there with him?" Before Sarah could answer, another scream, this one louder, closer, echoed through the air, cutting through everyone's bones. It came from the tree line. It came from the place Richard was hiding. And whatever caused it, did not sound human. The scream that erupted from the trees sounded like nothing any officer on that farm had heard before. It was sharp, broken, and full of terror, like someone had seen something they were never meant to see. Every head turned toward the dark forest line. Even the dogs went silent for a moment, their ears standing straight, bodies stiffening. Detective Sarah Collins raised her hand, signaling everyone to stay low. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing like a threat. Michelle and her mother crouched behind a police vehicle, their hands shaking as officers shielded them. Another noise followed, a crash like branches snapping violently. Then silence again. "Everyone hold your positions," Sarah said firmly, though her voice trembled just enough to reveal her worry. "We don't know what's happening in there." Officer Daniels, crouched beside a hay bale, whispered, "Detective, that scream didn't sound like Richard." "No," Sarah said softly. "It didn't. But if it wasn't Richard, then who was it? Was there someone else hiding on that property? Someone they didn't know about?" The forest rustled again. Every gun raised. Every officer held their breath. Then, from the trees, a figure stumbled out. At first, they couldn't tell who it was. The man was hunched over, moving slow, clutching his side. His clothes were torn. His face was streaked with dirt and blood. Officer Harris shouted, "Don't move! Hands where we can see them!" The man collapsed to his knees, coughing violently. One hand lifted weakly into the air. Sarah rushed forward, motioning for two officers to cover her. As she approached, the man lifted his head just enough for her to see his face. It wasn't Richard. It was Tom Lawson, Richard's hired worker. A man who had disappeared from town months earlier. People thought he had moved away. No one knew he was even still in Oregon. Sarah's breath caught. "Tom? What happened to you?" Tom wheezed, "Help please, he's gone crazy." "Who?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside him. Tom's eyes widened, trembling with fear. "Richard, he's not right, he's not." A gunshot exploded from the woods behind him. Tom screamed and ducked, curling into himself. Sarah dove for cover, shouting, "Shots fired! Get him behind the vehicles!" Officers grabbed Tom and dragged him into safety as bullets struck trees and dirt. Michelle screamed again, ducking lower as debris flew around them. Sarah pressed herself behind a truck, adrenaline flooding her chest. Richard wasn't just hiding. He was hunting, and he didn't want Tom talking. Once Tom was behind the vehicles, officers shielded him, but he was shaking violently. From shock, from pain, from whatever happened inside those trees. "Tom," Sarah said firmly, gripping his shoulder. "Look at me. Did Richard shoot you?" Tom shook his head quickly. No, he tried. But he's not alone. He's not alone out there." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "There's someone else," Tom screamed. "Someone he keeps in the back shed. Someone who shouldn't be alive. Someone." Another gunshot echoed, cutting him off. Officers returned fire into the tree line, not aiming to hit but to suppress, to keep Richard from advancing. Sarah lifted her radio. "All units, secure the perimeter. Nobody enters those woods without my order." Daniels crawled up beside her. "Detective, if Richard didn't shoot Tom, then who the hell is out there?" Sarah didn't know. Tom's words spun inside her head like a warning she didn't understand. Someone he keeps in the back shed. Someone who shouldn't be alive. Michelle was crying softly behind the vehicles. Her mother held her tightly, both terrified. When Sarah looked at them, something sharp twisted inside her. She had to finish this. She had to find the truth for Evan, for his family, for everyone who had waited all these years. She turned back to Tom. "You need to tell me exactly what is going on." Tom shook his head violently. No, we have to leave. He'll find us. He always finds us." "Tom," Sarah snapped. "Look at me." Tom's breathing grew fast, panicked, as if he couldn't pull in enough air. "You don't understand. Richard changed after that night, after Evan. He wouldn't let me go. He said I knew too much. He said if anybody came looking, I would be the next one under the slab." Sarah's stomach tightened. "So you were here when Evan disappeared?" Tom nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "I heard them arguing. Evan saw something in the shed. Something he shouldn't have. Richard panicked. He hit him. I tried to stop him but..." His voice broke. His body shook as if he might collapse again. "Tom," Sarah said gently. "What did Evan see?" Tom hesitated. A rustle sounded from the trees. He froze. His eyes widened so much the whites showed. "He's coming." 2 officers raised their weapons, scanning the forest. Sarah whispered, "Tom, what did Evan see?" Tom looked at her with a face full of pure terror. His voice cracked as he whispered, "He saw her." Sarah blinked. "Her? Who's her?" Tom didn't answer. His breathing sped up. His eyes darted around. He kept her hidden, locked up. She was supposed to be dead, but she wasn't. Sarah's heart slammed against her chest. Was this real? Was Tom hallucinating? Or was there truly someone else living on this farm? Before she could ask more, another loud crack burst from the woods. But it wasn't a gunshot. It was a voice. A woman's voice. High, broken, trembling with pain. Help me!" Michelle gasped. Officers exchanged terrified glances. Even the dogs reacted, whining loudly and pulling their leashes. Daniels whispered, "Detective, no one else lives on this property." Sarah felt ice move down her spine. "That's what we thought," she whispered. The woman cried out again, this time louder, more desperate. Please don't leave me." Officers shifted anxiously, unsure whether it was a trap or a real victim. Sarah tried to steady her breathing. She had been on dozens of cases, but nothing had ever felt like this. "Tom," she said softly, "who is she?" But Tom didn't answer. Because Tom was staring past Sarah, eyes locked on something behind her. Something moving. "Detective," Daniels whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Something's coming out of the trees." Sarah slowly stood and turned. A woman staggered into the open. Her clothes were filthy and torn. Her hair was tangled and wild. Her skin was pale, covered in bruises. She looked like she hadn't seen the sun in years. Her wrists had deep marks, old, healed scars that came from ropes or cuffs. She looked barely alive. Michelle gasped and covered her mouth. Officers stood frozen, not believing what they were seeing. The woman limped toward them, trembling violently, her voice shaking as she whispered, Please, help me." Sarah stepped forward cautiously. "Ma'am, you're safe now. You're safe. We won't hurt you." But the woman suddenly stopped 30 feet away and stared directly at Sarah. Her eyes were wide, terrified, almost animalistic. She whispered, "He's coming, he's coming, he's coming." Daniels raised his weapon. "Richard." The woman's voice cracked. "No, not Richard." Sarah froze. "Then who?" she whispered. The woman lifted a shaky hand and pointed behind her into the trees. Officers raised their guns again. The dogs barked like they were losing their minds. Tom screamed, "Get her away from the woods! Get her away now!" Sarah rushed forward, grabbing the woman's arm. "We have to move. We need to get you to safety." But the woman wouldn't move. Her eyes were locked on the forest behind her. Then, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Tall, thin, dirty, barefoot, hair matted, clothes torn, eyes wild. A man, if he was even still human. The woman screamed. Officers backed up. Michelle sobbed loudly. The figure stepped closer, hands shaking, breath ragged. Tom shouted, "That's him. That's the one. He's the reason Evan died. He's the one Richard kept hidden." Sarah raised her weapon sharply. "Don't move." The man didn't stop. He stared at Sarah like he didn't understand the world around him. Like he had lived in darkness for years and had only now crawled out into the light. He whispered something so quietly that only Sarah heard it. "Help me." Sarah felt her chest tighten. This man wasn't attacking. He was begging. He was broken. He was lost. But before she could move, a gunshot exploded from inside the forest. The man jerked. A red spot spread across his shirt. He collapsed to the ground. The woman screamed, falling to her knees beside him. Michelle cried out in horror. Officers dropped behind vehicles again. Sarah whipped her head toward the trees. Another figure was emerging. This one holding a rifle. This one walking slowly, like he owned the land beneath his feet. This one Sarah recognized immediately. Richard Morrison. He stepped into the clearing, his face cold, his clothes stained with dirt and sweat. His eyes were wild. He raised the rifle directly at Sarah, and he said 6 words that made everyone freeze where they stood. He told you what he saw. The moment the concrete slab cracked open, the whole air around the equipment shed felt different, almost heavier, like the ground itself was holding its breath. The flashlight beams shook in the officer's hands. Dust floated in the air like tiny white sparks. And then someone said it softly, almost like they were afraid the truth would hear them. "I see something. I see bones." The dogs stopped barking and stood perfectly still, noses pointed toward the uncovered dirt. Even they seemed to understand that this was no longer just a search. This was now something else, something final. Deputy Collins knelt down first. His gloves brushed away the dirt gently, like he didn't want to disturb whatever was underneath. And then they all saw it at the same time, the corner of a blue tarp. Oh, dirty, buried deep, and wrapped inside it the shape of a human body. Someone whispered, "My God." Another officer stepped back, covering his mouth like he was afraid he might throw up. The cold Oregon air suddenly felt too warm. The last thing anyone said before the world spun into chaos was, "Call the medical examiner. Now." And then everything exploded into noise. More officers rushed in. Lights were turned on. Cameras were pulled out. Someone stretched crime scene tape around the shed. The dogs were taken away, whining as if they wanted to stay. And the tarp just sat there, half buried, half exposed, like it had been waiting 3 long years for someone to finally drag it back into the light. But that wasn't even the most shocking part of the moment. Because lying on top of the dirt, clearly pushed aside during the digging, was a necklace. A small silver necklace with a round pendant. A sunflower, the kind a mother gives her daughter. And every single officer on that farm knew exactly who that necklace belonged to. It belonged to Emily Carter, the missing mom from 2021. The woman whose children still left the porch light on for her every night. The woman whose case had turned cold. The woman whose husband, Michael, had become the face of a grieving parent all over Oregon. Suddenly, the farm wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a crime scene, a graveyard, and the place where at least one person's biggest secret had finally come crawling out of the dirt. The cliffhanger of Chapter 3 had revealed the tarp and the bones. But what they were about to piece together over the next several hours, that was even worse. The medical examiner arrived with 2 assistants. They worked slowly, carefully, brushing dirt away inch by inch. The tarp was lifted just enough for identification. They didn't fully open it yet. They never do that at the scene. But they saw enough to confirm it was human remains, and that the remains were wrapped in a blanket with a faded pattern of little sheep on it. A kid's blanket, the kind of blanket Emily always kept in her car for her toddlers. When one of the officers realized what blanket it was, he had to step away. He'd been the one who stood with Emily's crying son during the original search 3 years ago. And now here he was again, except the ending was different this time. A black SUV finally rolled up the dirt path and stopped near the shed. Inside was Detective Megan Hale, the lead investigator who had worked Emily Carter's case from the very beginning. She stepped out of the car, her jaw tight, eyes sharp. She didn't say a single word as she walked toward the shed. She just listened. The whispers, the rustling of the plastic tarp, the clicks of camera shutters, and then the silence. The kind of silence that comes when you're staring at the truth you never wanted to believe. "Is it her?" she asked quietly. Deputy Collins swallowed. "We found her necklace." Detective Hale closed her eyes for a long moment. Her breath trembled just once. Then she opened her eyes again, and they were cold with determination. "Secure everything," she said. "No one goes in or out. And get me a warrant for Richard Morrison's house. Immediately." Richard Morrison, the man who owned the 180-acre farm, the man who told the police he hadn't seen anything unusual in years, the man who said he didn't know Emily Carter, the man whose concrete slab just revealed a body. His name suddenly wasn't just the name of a property owner. It was the name of a suspect. Officers spread out across the property. Some searched the barns. Others followed tire tracks. Some took fingerprints from door handles. Every few minutes, they brought back something they found. A rusted shovel, a torn glove, an old burner phone buried in a drawer, receipt, trash bags, a piece of rope. Everything had to be photographed, bagged, and labeled. Meanwhile, Detective Hale walked around the outside of the shed, studying the ground. She crouched, ran her hand across the soil, and noticed something no one else had seen yet. 2 tire imprints beside the shed that didn't match Richard Morrison's truck. "These tracks are old," she murmured, "but not 3 years old. More like 2. Her mind raced. If these tracks weren't Richard's, then someone else had been here after Emily disappeared. Someone who knew exactly where her body was buried. She stood up quickly. "Where is Richard right now?" A young officer responded. "He's in his house, ma'am. We told him to stay inside while we process the scene." Detective Hale nodded slowly. "Good. Keep eyes on him. No one talks to him until we get the warrant." But something didn't sit right with her. Something felt off, like a puzzle piece was missing. Richard was calm, too calm, almost like he'd known the police were coming, almost like he'd been waiting for this day. Inside Richard Morrison's farmhouse, the old man sat in a wooden chair by the window, staring at the lights and movement outside. His hands shook, but not from fear. It looked more like anger, or exhaustion, or maybe both. An officer stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him closely. Richard didn't look up. He just muttered to himself, too quietly to understand. Detective Hale finally entered the house. She studied Richard for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "we're going to ask you some questions as soon as the warrant comes in. Until then, please stay seated." Richard didn't answer. He just kept staring at the equipment shed in the distance. After a long moment, he whispered, "I told him this would happen." Detective Hale stepped forward. "Told who?" Richard didn't blink, didn't move, didn't answer. But his jaw tightened, and that was enough to make Hale feel her stomach twist. Someone else was involved. Someone Richard was protecting. Someone dangerous. Back at the shed, the medical examiner carefully lifted the body, still wrapped in the tarp, and placed it on a stretcher. Officers cleared a path so it could be taken to the coroner's office. And as they lifted the stretcher, something small fell out from inside the tarp and landed softly on the dirt. A single key. A key with a bright red rubber cover on its top. A key that clearly didn't belong to the farm. A key that looked like it belonged to a locker or a storage unit. Detective Hale picked it up very gently. She turned it over. She studied the shape. She whispered, "This changes everything. Because if Emily Carter had a key with her, then she had been on her way somewhere. Somewhere important. Somewhere secret. Somewhere someone didn't want her to reach." And suddenly the entire case opened wide again. Not closed. Not solved. Not finished. Just bigger. Darker. And a whole lot more dangerous. Hours passed. The search continued. Officers combed every inch of the property, even the far fields near the tree line. And right when they began to lose energy, right when they thought they had found everything they were going to find, an officer shouted from behind the barn, "Detective Hale, you need to see this." Everyone rushed over, flashlights slicing through the darkness. The officer pointed to something sticking out of the ground. It wasn't another body. It wasn't another tarp. It was a shoe. A woman's shoe. Half buried. Half exposed. Detective Hale crouched and picked it up. The shoe was muddy, worn down, and had a broken strap. But she knew exactly whose shoe it was. She had seen it in pictures. She had seen it in reports. The shoe belonged to Emily Carter too. But here was the problem. Emily only owned one pair of those shoes, meaning the shoe they found near the barn wasn't the shoe she had been wearing when she disappeared. She had been wearing the other shoe, which meant she had been here twice, once alive, once dead. That truth hit Hale like a punch to the chest. Emily Carter had been brought here before, and she had left something behind. Something the killer didn't notice. Something dangerous. Detective Hale stood up slowly, tightening her jaw. "We need to search this entire property again," she ordered. "Every room, every attic, every hidden space. Emily left clues, and I want every single one of them." Officers nodded and spread out again. The lights got brighter. The shouting grew louder. The farm buzzed with fear, adrenaline, and anger. And then, just when they thought they had found the last of the surprises, a scream tore through the night. It came from inside Richard Morrison's farmhouse, a deep, terrified scream, followed by the sound of a struggle, followed by a crash, followed by complete silence. Officers ran toward the house, boots pounding against the dirt. The wind howled, the dogs barked wildly, and Detective Hale sprinted faster than anyone, her heart slamming in her chest. She didn't know what she would find inside, but she knew one thing for sure. Something had just gone terribly wrong. Something that would change the entire case. Something that would open the door to the darkest twist yet. And that moment, the scream from inside Richard Morrison's farmhouse froze the entire search team. For one single second, no one moved, not even the wind. It was the kind of scream that didn't sound like fears. It sounded like someone who finally knew their secret was about to blow open. Detective Megan Hale was the first to sprint toward the house. Her boots pounded the dirt path as she shouted, "Move! Move!" Officers ran behind her, flashlights shaking, hands already reaching for weapons. The dogs barked wildly, pulling at their leashes. When Hale reached the front porch, the farmhouse door hung wide open. A lamp inside had been knocked over, casting strange shadows across the wooden floor. Something crashed deeper inside, a chair maybe, followed by a choked groan. "Richard!" Hale yelled. "Officers, inside now." They stormed through the doorway, guns drawn. The house smelled like dust and old wood, but now there was something else, something metallic, something sharp. The smell of blood. A trail of red drops led down the hallway. "Secure the back exit," an officer shouted as others rushed down the hall. But before they reached the living room, something slid across the floorboards ahead of them, a knife. A kitchen knife with a wooden handle. Fresh blood coated the blade. Then they saw him. Richard Morrison. The farm owner. The man who didn't know anything. The man the cadaver dogs had unknowingly been calling out for hours. He was slumped against the wall, breathing fast and shallow. His shirt was covered in blood, but it wasn't clear yet if it was his or someone else's. "Don't let him leave," Richard gasped, pointing with a shaking finger toward the back of the house. "Don't let him get away." Detective Hale knelt beside him. Who was in here?" Richard swallowed hard, his eyes wide and terrified now, a very different man than the calm, quiet one sitting in the chair earlier. "My nephew," he whispered. "It was Dylan. He's the one you want." The room went silent. The name hit Hale like a blow. Dylan Morrison, Richard's nephew, had lived on and off at the farm for years. He had a record of petty theft. He had been questioned once in 2021 about a stolen truck, but no one had ever tied him to Emily Carter. "Where is he?" Hale demanded. Richard coughed, pain crossing his face. "Back door." He ran. He saw you found the body." He panicked. The officers exploded into action. Two rushed outside to circle the property. Another checked the back door. One shouted that there were fresh footprints in the mud. Detective Hale stood up, her voice now a blade. "Lock down the farm. No one leaves this property." She pointed toward the woods. "He's running. Take the dogs and track him." Within seconds, officers and cadaver dogs sprinted toward the tree line. Flashlights cut through the darkness like sharp white swords, and Detective Hale turned back to Richard. "You're going to tell me everything," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, it was final. Richard lowered his head, his breath shaking. "I tried to cover for him," he whispered. "But I didn't kill her. I swear. I didn't kill that girl." Hale stared hard at him. "Then tell me what happened." Richard closed his eyes tightly, as if the memories themselves were knives. "It was an accident," he said. At least, that's what he said that night. What night? The night Emily came here. Detective Hale's heart clenched. This was it. 3 years of questions were about to spill out. "She wasn't supposed to be here," Richard whispered. "Dylan knew her. He didn't tell me at first. They'd been talking online." Hale's eyes narrowed. Emily Carter had been a married mother of 2. She barely used the internet, but the digital world had pulled bigger surprises before. "He told her he had something of hers," Richard continued. "Said she needed to come get it. Something about a key. The key. The red-topped key they found under the tarp." Detective Hale felt her spine go cold. "She came to the farm," Richard said, voice trembling. "I was inside. Dylan was out near the shed. I heard yelling." He paused, as if the memory was too sharp. "When I finally came out," he said, "she was on the ground. Not moving." Detective Hale felt her chest tighten. She whispered, "What did he do, Richard?" Richard swallowed. "He said she fell. Hit her head on the shovel. Said it was an accident." "And you believed him?" Hale asked sharply. Richard hesitated. I didn't know. She was just lying there. And he was screaming, crying, begging me to help him. He said no one would believe him. And instead of calling 911, Hale said, "You helped bury her." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Yes." Detective Hale stared at him for a long moment. Then her voice hardened. "You do realize you made everything 10 times worse?" Richard nodded slowly. I know. I've been carrying that for 3 years." She stepped back as paramedics entered to treat him. But before they lifted him, Richard grabbed Hale's wrist. His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's something else." Hale froze. "What?" "The key she had, the one she kept trying to protect. Dylan still has the locker number." "What locker?" Richard's eyes widened. "The storage locker he rented in town." Hale felt a chill crawl up her back. "What's inside it?" Richard whispered 2 words that sent every hair on her body standing straight up. "Her car." Outside, chaos ripped across the farmland. Officers shouted orders. Searchlights from squad cars lit up the trees. Branches snapped as they ran deeper into the woods. The cadaver dogs pulled hard, sniffing the air, following Dylan's path. But Dylan Morrison was fast, and desperate, and dangerous. He darted through the trees, clothes ripping on brambles, breath sharp in panic. He kept looking over his shoulder, gasping. They found her, it's all over." But he didn't stop. He knew the property better than anyone. He knew the shortcuts. He knew which parts of the woods dropped off into steep cliff. He knew where the broken fence was that led to the old logging road. He also knew he couldn't let himself be caught. Not after what he did. At the farmhouse, Detective Hale got a call from one of the officers. "Hale, we found tracks headed straight toward the old ridge path," the officer reported. "The dogs are close. They say he's maybe 2 minutes ahead." "Stay on him," Hale ordered. "Do not engage. Do not shoot unless he threatens someone." She ended the call and immediately radioed the sheriff. "We need teams at the logging road and the ridge. He's trying to get off the property." The sheriff responded, "Copy. Units on the way." But Hale knew something the younger officers didn't. That ridge was deadly. One wrong step, one loose rock, and you drop 30 feet into a rocky ravine. Dylan was panicking. He wasn't thinking clearly. He might go right over the edge. She grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the woods herself. Meanwhile, Dylan burst out of the trees and staggered toward the ridge. His chest heaved. His head spun. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep running. He tripped twice, falling hard on the rocks. Behind him, the sound of dogs grew louder, barking, snarling, closing in. "No, no, no," he whispered, climbing to his feet. "I'm not going to prison. I'm not." He reached the ridge, a narrow ledge overlooking a drop that looked black and bottomless in the night. He turned, breathing like a trapped animal, and then the dogs exploded out of the trees not 20 feet away. Dylan took one step back, just one. The rock crumbled under his heel. He flailed his arms. He tried to grab a branch. He tried to scream, but gravity pulled him backward, and Dylan Morrison fell. He hit the rocks below with a sickening thud. The dogs stopped barking. The world went horribly quiet. Officers rushed to the edge. One of them held up a flashlight, shining it down into the ravine. "Detective Hale," the officer radioed. "We found the suspect. He's not moving." Hale arrived seconds later, chest burning from the run. She looked down into the ravine and saw Dylan's body twisted unnaturally on the rocks. She exhaled slowly, not with relief, not with satisfaction, but with the heavy acceptance that sometimes justice doesn't look clean. Sometimes it looks like the truth taking someone by the hand and dragging them over a cliff. The case didn't end that night. It unfolded over the next week. Richard Morrison was arrested at the hospital and charged with the improper disposal of a body, obstruction, a tampering with evidence. He didn't fight it. He didn't hire a big lawyer. He just said, "I'm ready to tell everything." Dylan's body was recovered from the ravine. Toxicology confirmed he had meth and alcohol in his system the night Emily died, matching the signs of panic, impulsiveness, and recklessness Richard described. The storage locker was opened under warrant. Inside it, detectives found Emily's missing SUV, her purse, her phone, a blood-stained blanket, the missing shoe that matched the one found on the farm, Dylan's fingerprints all over everything. There was also a notebook. Inside that notebook were messages Dylan had written to himself, rambling, angry, guilty. Some talking about Emily, some claiming it was an accident, some claiming she shouldn't have yelled at him. But the final page, that was the one no one could forget. It read, "They'll never find her. No one ever looks under the concrete." 3 years later, Emily Carter finally came home. Her funeral filled the small Oregon church. Her children, now older, quieter, and changed forever, finally had a place to visit their mother. Her husband cried harder than anyone had ever seen. Detective Hale attended the service. She didn't speak. She didn't want attention. She just stood at the back, hands clasped, as the pastor said. Truth makes its way to the surface, even when someone tries to bury it. And Hale thought about the cadaver dogs, how they refused to leave that one spot, how they knew something was wrong, how they knew Emily was still there, waiting. And Hale thought about Emily herself, how she fought, how she left clues, how she held on to that key even at the end, how she made sure someone would find her someday. The truth had been buried, but it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right moment, the right team, the right dog, to finally point at the concrete slab and say, "Start digging." And that is how the story ends. Real, heavy, human, and a reminder that even the darkest secrets eventually come to light.